So, Chelsea, today we are talking about commercial leases, what landlords and tenants need to know before they sign. Just let's set the stage a little bit here. Why commercial lease is different from your normal residential lease. When a business owner comes to you after signing a commercial lease and something has gone wrong, what are the common things that you hear them say they wish they knew beforehand?
For a landlord, the most common concern, I guess, that I hear is essentially that they just didn't understand what their leverage was when negotiating the lease. The most common situation that I have where a landlord will come to me after the lease has already been signed is a situation where the landlord probably was not represented by an attorney when they were putting the lease together. The tenant is now wanting to break the lease or assign the lease, and the language in that lease just isn't written appropriately. I had a situation come up recently where the landlord was wanting to approve the assignment, but the lease didn't specify who was going to pay for the cost of the assignment. So we were able to ultimately negotiate that the tenant assigning did pay the landlord the cost of the assignment, but it took a lot more time and a lot more negotiation to get to that point versus if it had been in the lease to begin with. So again, that landlord specifically went into that lease agreement, did not have legal representation, and now, something is changing. Someone is either defaulting or assigning, and they're wishing that they had a stronger lease in place. And a lot of times my client says, well, I didn't even realize I could ask for that. So I think a big thing is just realizing what's common and what you should be asking for as a landlord.
Well, and I guess a lot of people might assume that a commercial lease works basically the same as a residential lease. Where could that get tenants in trouble?
They are totally different animals. So residential leases are really, really highly regulated by Florida statute and the specific municipalities. So the specific cities, the specific counties, everyone, especially after COVID, has put in place all kinds of protections, rules to protect the tenant. The sort of idea among all of these rules is we want to keep people in their homes. We don't want people to be homeless. We don't want to get in a situation where you have a landlord who is imposing unfair restrictions on someone's primary residence. So that's where the government gets involved and they want to place those protections on the landlord tenant situation in a residential context. In commercial, it is much different. We do still have Florida statute does still have a non-residential statute that governs commercial leases. However, it is much less intense. It is much less regulated. And for the most part, everything is based on contract. So it's based on the lease itself and what was agreed upon between the parties.
So what is a triple net lease and why does it matter so much which lease structure you're signing?
So it matters because it goes to affordability of the lease. So triple net is a term that I think is thrown around a lot, and maybe people don't necessarily understand what it means. So if you take the triple out of it and you just think of it as a net lease, so if you have a true 100% net lease, the idea is that the base rent paid to the landlord is net profit to the landlord, meaning that any other costs or expenses that that landlord's going to incur as part of their ownership of the building, that's going to be additional rent. And that base rent, that's essentially guaranteeing the landlord's profit if you have a true 100% net lease. So for a triple net lease, it really it sort of depends on what the three main categories are that the tenant is paying for. But for the most part, when people say triple net, they mean the tenant is paying for base rent, plus they're paying their portion of property taxes, their portion of building insurance, and their portion of building maintenance.
Okay.
So on the flip side, so that's a net lease and a triple net. On the flip side, you have a gross lease. Now, gross lease is almost completely opposite. You are paying one sum to the landlord, and that is gross profit to the landlord. So any property taxes, insurance, maintenance on the property is going to come out of that gross payment that the tenant pays every month. So For if you're a tenant, a gross lease is great. It's very predictable. You know, my rent every month is $5,000 per month, and I'm not going to be responsible for anything else. Versus a net lease, you are going to have your base rent, which is predictable, that $5,000 a month every month. But then on top of that, you'll have your additional rent, and those costs will fluctuate based on what's included in additional rent and how they change, because property taxes change every year, insurance changes every year, the maintenance of the property may change every year, so it is more unpredictable.
So what are maybe the two or three lease terms that tenants are most consistently failing to negotiate, even when they had leverage to do so?
The guarantee agreements. So if you get a lease from a landlord, it's very likely that the lease is going to have a full, unlimited personal guarantee, meaning that you as an individual are going to be personally responsible for this lease for the entire term of the lease. Um, Often we can negotiate a rolling guarantee after a certain number of years. You know, ideally, we would negotiate after the first 3 years. So let's say perfect world, we negotiate a rolling guarantee after 3 years. So you stay personally guaranteed under that lease for just the first 3 years. And then after that, it's a rolling 1-year personal guarantee. And what that does is if you're under a 10-year lease, well, after you hit that 3-year mark, okay, now you're only personally obligated for 1 year every year. So if there's a default, if the business fails and goes bankrupt, you're going to be personally liable for 1 year of that lease versus the remaining 4, 5, 6 years of that lease. And that's extremely beneficial. Another provision would be early termination clauses. You know, if I'm representing a landlord, absolutely not. We're not accepting early termination clauses, but there is a way to negotiate them in a way that is still financially beneficial for the landlord and allows the tenant to have sort of the peace of mind that, hey, if this business venture doesn't go the way that I think it is, I have an out. It might cost me I might have to pay a termination fee, but at least I can pay and I can get out of this lease. And then the last one would be a cap on the increase for the common area maintenance charges, like we were just discussing. Or another thing that I'm able to negotiate pretty consistently is a warranty for large ticket items like the HVAC. So if you're a triple net tenant coming into a lease and you're taking over maintenance of the entire property, you know, if you get into that property and 2 months later the air conditioning fails, it's very beneficial to have a 6-month warranty from the landlord built into that saying, hey, the landlord's going to maintenance the HVAC for the first 3, 6, 9 months, whatever they're willing to agree to. Because after you get past that point, you've been in the property long enough to know if there's going to be issues with the air conditioning, you know, and the HVAC is just one example, but that is one of the larger ticket items that you'll find yourself responsible for as a triple net tenant.
So you also handle lease with option to purchase structures. What are the key things to get right when a lease includes a purchase option, especially potentially for a small business owner who sees it as a path to actually owning their space?
Yeah. Um, so one thing that I see often is a confusion between an option to purchase and a right of first refusal, and those are very different. So an option gives you the sole and exclusive right, or it should, if it's drafted correctly, give you the sole and exclusive right to purchase that property within your option period. So most typically, if you have an option, the option period is going to be for the term of your lease. So if you have a 5-year lease with a well-written option, then you have the exclusive option to purchase that property within that 5-year span. So that's one thing that I would want to look closely at is making sure that it's drafted as a true option and not as a right of first refusal or right of first offer or anything like that. The other thing that you want to look really closely at is the consideration for the option and whether or not you anticipate that any rent that you've paid over the course of the term of the lease is being applied to the purchase price at the end. Those are two things that are often confused in negotiations.
Okay.